Hello, I'm Eric Lawrenson, and welcome to Cap Times Talks, a podcast bringing you smart conversations about big topics in our city. On today's show, what's going to happen in the Wisconsin primaries? State primary elections are less than a week away, so today we're bringing you a conversation between two longtime political operatives in Wisconsin, Republican Keith Gilkes and Democrat Tonya Bjork. In their chat from earlier this month with Cap Times state political reporter Jessie Opoien, the two talk about their assessment of what's going on in the race for governor and the race for the U.S. Senate. They also talk about Wisconsin's reputation as a purple state, the biggest challenges facing their parties, and what it's like to forge a friendship across the aisle. Jessie kicked things off by asking both Gilkes and Bjork to talk about their history working on political campaigns. I'll let her take things from here.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourselves, each of you, your history, how you got to where you are in Wisconsin, how you got into politics, memorable campaigns, just sort of...
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Especially for me, who's been doing this for way too long. So my name's Tonya Bjork, and I am a political consultant, communications consultant, and strategist on the Democratic side. So I have been doing this literally almost all my adult working life. I started out in politics when I was in college at University of Minnesota Duluth College Dems and got involved there. And then my first statewide race was working for Paul Wellstone's 1996 race. So don't tell me how old you were then. I don't want to know. But I started out in campaigns there and having had really the great opportunity to work for Paul Wellstone. And then from there in 1997, I moved here to Wisconsin and worked, did the Feingold 98 race. And when politics and campaigns were a lot different, I think back then we capped ourselves at $1 per voter, so we spent like $5 million, and now Keith is like, what did you get to your $100 millionth raise so far earlier this week? Yeah, so it's changed a little bit since I started. And then after I did the Wellstone race, after I did that, then I ran the Assembly Caucus and worked for Emily's List and the AFL-CIO, and then did all kinds of other races. Did Obama 08 and 12, and in 14 did Mary Burke, where Keith kicked my ass, and then did the Clinton campaign as well this last time. So done races big and small, and federal and state, and I'm really happy to be here with Keith, who I'll just say is to my right.
So my history: I grew up in a small, sleepy town in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. It's right on the Mississippi River. I grew up on the Wisconsin River. They both meet right to the south of Prairie du Chien, so I'm affectionately known from that part as a river rat growing up. I went to UW-Madison. I won't state the year at all.
Thank you.
I started out in genetics at UW-Madison, and I got to almost my full third year, and I was taking a lab class, and I had a UW professor come up to me in the lab class and say, "Keith, do you have anything interesting that you're doing besides genetics?" And I said, "Well, I'm starting to take some political science classes just because I'm interested." And he said, "Ooh, you'd be great at that." And I took that as a hint that probably I was not made to be in a lab and study genetics for the rest of my life. So, which the professor calmly explained to me afterwards that he thought I was probably best not to spend the rest of my life in a lab because I was too distracting and kind of a boisterous, fun guy in the lab, evidently, that distracted from the work that needed to be done. So after that, I started doing more poli-sci classes and graduated with a poli-sci degree, and then went to work for the legislature. My first boss was Representative Carol Owens, and a fantastic lady from outside of Oshkosh. And I worked with her for about a year and a half before I went to join the Sheila Harsdorf for Senate campaign, and that was my first campaign. It was my first introduction really to the campaign world, and I loved every aspect of it. After that, I spent better part of a decade in the state Senate running races and overseeing committee to elect a Republican Senate. And then from there, I jumped onto the Walker campaign in 2009. Then Milwaukee County Executive Scott Walker launched his bid and have been with him ever since. Ran the recall, so I think that was, you asked what was the biggest win. I don't think I can beat that one. And then I was his first chief of staff during Act 10, so I've seen a lot of history over the time. I've been involved in U.S. Senate races with Tommy Thompson in 2012. I've been involved in congressional races, actually in Minnesota, and a number of other races across the country. So seen a little bit of everything, federal, state, even some local stuff, so well-traveled and seen a lot.
So this, I mean, for me as a reporter, this may be something the audience isn't really familiar with, but like you two aren't really people whose names are in print ever. But you're talking a little bit more. Why is now, I guess, a good time for you guys to start sharing your experiences? And also, how did you get to be friends? I mean, you guys get along. This is it's proof that there's some kind of bipartisan friendship in the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, we do get along. I don't agree with a damn thing he stands for, really, but he's a nice person and he's an honest person and he tells it like it is. And he often, I will say that we can actually have real conversations and put the shield down, I guess, occasionally. And that's how we got to be friends in doing this work. And we've done a few of these things now, I think 3 or 4 of them maybe, and I think we're doing a few more coming up. So it's a fun thing to do. It's a healthy dialogue, and I think Keith is always honest and fair to me. So can't say that for everybody else in your party, but for Keith I can. Now say some nice things about me.
Well, I was just going to say, you did such a great job. I'd say ditto back about Tonya. But, for me, I think both of us have been involved in politics before. I think staff and other political operatives kind of turned it into almost a war at the end of the day, as opposed to it's a battle, and then the day after the election you can kind of let your guard down, talk about how you won, how you lost, compliment the other side for their success at the end of the day. And Tonya's had some great wins here and helped a lot of good candidates win the state, and I've done likewise. But at the end of the day, we're also very good at our individual crafts, and I think we like to compare notes and what were you thinking then, and what was what I was trying to decide or figure out that she was going to do with the Burke campaign and things like that. And it's just fun. And I think when you have people that are professional and friends at the same time, it doesn't always have to be about politics. We also happen to have kids, and we love talking about our kids and shared experiences. So you can get past the whole political divide piece if you're just willing to kind of let your guard down, be honest. And it's hard to say, and you'll never hear from a politician or an elected official, but sometimes we're not right, and sometimes we are wrong, and it's okay to admit that along the way. But for Tonya and I think it's always been, as she said, we're willing to be honest with each other. I think we're at the point in life where you kind of look back and say, I've accomplished a lot, I've done a lot. It's okay to let your guard down and be honest with each other and, compare notes. It's fun.
And when one of us says, I'm not telling you that, we respect that too. Because that happens a lot too. It's like, are you kidding me? I'm not telling you that.
There are trade secrets. There are always trade secrets.
Well, Keith, you touched on something that I wanted to ask you about. Something that's changed is the mentality shift from this being a battle to it being really a blood sport and a war. What else have you two observed in terms of changes in the Wisconsin political landscape over, milestones being Scott Walker being elected, the recall, Donald Trump winning the first time a Republican won a presidential contest here since 1984. Other things, what else has changed in terms of the political environment here?
Well, I'll go first and say that the stakes are much higher between the two, I think. And the divisions are much deeper because the stakes are higher. And because campaigns cost so much more money now for everybody involved, they're just harder, I think, now is probably the first thing that at the top of my mind to answer that question. So what would you say?
Yeah, I think the challenge always is that you get so vested in outcomes that sometimes you forget about kind of the the process or the journey to the end of the rainbow, if you will, in terms of, success policy-wise or compromise or solving problems or things like that. So like Tonya noted, I mean, there's just a lot at stake, and I think everyone has put a lot of pressure on elected officials, and that's whether it's, in the Dem Party or the Republican Party. There's just more pressure on candidates, more pressure from the supporters that back them and fund them, and they want to see, achievements, accomplishments, and they're sometimes very impatient, and our entire society is very impatient, but especially in politics. They want to see progress and movement almost immediately from day one, and that is a true challenge to do. And I don't, sometimes we forget this, but, one thing I can take away from my time as a poli-sci student was, this type of government was not designed to move fast. It was supposed to be slow and deliberative at the end of the day. And so it takes a lot to accomplish a lot in short amounts of time. But that pressure is never going away, I don't foresee. And I think also just the culture, pop culture, society cultural aspects like social media and just this drive for the news media to break stories and get news out there. Just everything's on steroids, and just there's a bigger microscope on everything you do, and that presents challenges.
Well, and not only a bigger microscope in terms of that, but also we're not screwing around on the edges on a lot of these policy decisions that are being made. And we're not talking about whether the tax code is going to change 1/8%. We're talking about, are there going to be unions or not? Those are really big things and really high stakes. And that means that the divisions are deeper, and oftentimes the gloves are faster to come off, I think.
We've seen wins for both of your political parties in big ways, in ways that don't seem to make sense. Tammy Baldwin, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Scott Walker, Ron Johnson, all winners in the same state in a decade. What is it about this state that allows that to happen?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the environment that we were in those particular times of those races. I think we see that now, too. I think it has to do with money. It always has to do with money. Most of those candidates that you mentioned had more money than the others. Not in every case, but a lot. And I think it was the quality of the candidate in some cases, I would say too. Certainly not all, but in some cases. And so, but really, it's about authenticity of the candidate, I think too, and it's about turnout. You'll hear me talk about this a lot, particularly for our side. I think. I mean, a lot of the outcomes of elections for our side is really dependent on turnout, and which is why turnout for us is so damn important. So those are the first thoughts I would have about why that is. And we do have a pretty big swath of independent voters out there.
Yeah. And I think, while we all talk about the disappearing ticket splitter, there's still a relevant piece of success in determining winners or losers statewide, whether Trump wins or Obama wins. It's still coming down to, while, in the late 90s with Tommy Thompson, winning almost nearly 60%, you're not going to see that anymore. But the ticket splitter is still going to decide who wins a state, whether it's for governor or for president at the end of the day. And, maybe that universe is 300,000, and I've referred to them as the magical unicorn voter out there. Someone that might vote Scott Walker and Tammy Baldwin. They do exist. They are out there. They're hard to find, but they are there. You just got to look hard for them.
Maybe not this year.
Yeah, we'll see.
The other thing too, and like I said, I already sort of spoiled this by saying you're going to hear me say this a lot, but turnout for our side, turnout matters almost even more. We still need to persuade independents and persuadable voters for sure, but turnout matters so much more for us. And case in point is the 2016 presidential race, where Mitt Romney got more votes than Donald Trump did. So we didn't lose because we lost because our folks didn't turn out. So turnout matters a lot more, I think, on our side. You have more dependable voters all the time. It's why you usually win special elections, but that hasn't happened the last couple. So, so there's that.
Yeah. So looking at losses, I'm thinking the 2012 primary for the Republican Senate race was a particularly bruising one for Republicans. Democrats have had some, well, in the general too, obviously, but Democrats have not had a good run in terms of governor's races. What lessons do you think each of your parties have learned from some of those more recent state level losses?
I suppose I have to go first because I've lost more. Is that why you're shaking your head?
I don't know what that's like. I don't know.
Remember when I said I liked him?
Take it back.
Take it back. Yeah. I think candidates matter. Again, I'm going to go back to that. Turnout really matters. And authenticity matters. I think money matters. I'm going to go back to that a lot too. We always have a challenge with trying to raise enough money to get our message out and compete with the other side. But I think, we've learned too that particularly, and I'll go back to what I mentioned before about the 2016 presidential race, we've also learned that you can't, on our side, you can't expect the same outcomes if you don't put the same inputs in, right? You can't expect turnout to be at 2012 levels if you don't do the things you need to do to make it so. And that was a big failing of the Clinton campaign here in Wisconsin. Well, wasn't the fault of us here in Wisconsin. It was a fault of Brooklyn not prioritizing Wisconsin enough to be able to give us the resources that we would need. So honestly, that's the biggest lesson or the biggest sort of worst loss I've experienced. Mary Burke was hard, but at least with Mary, we knew that we left it all on the field as much as we could, right? There was nothing we didn't do that was in our power to do, and we lost. That hurts, but it hurts even more when you feel like you didn't do what you needed or you could have done to make the outcome completely different.
And I think the number one thing behind losses and wins, that's the most important piece, is candidates. At the end of the day, if you have a great candidate, no one can deny the fact that Barack Obama was a transformative candidate at the end of the day. We can argue about the policies and the outcomes, but he was a transformative candidate for the country.
You're for Obamacare now, right?
No.
Isn't that what that reinsurance program is all about?
No.
Oh.
What we are doing is trying to fix a program that has been broken with the best available solution because D.C. won't fix the problem. And
I'll give you that.
That's a critique of my party as well. But yeah, candidates matter. And, but at the same time, running good campaigns matter. And being a part of 2012, in the U.S. Senate run, there was nobody that I think was more popular than Tommy Thompson as governor. And I think even to this day, he still probably has a 70% job approval, but yet he still lost in 2012. And I think that was a combination of Obama being at the top of the ticket, but also Tammy Baldwin being a very astute politician in running a really good campaign, and she was ultimately successful. So you can have great candidates, you can still lose. You can have bad candidates, you can still win.
That's for sure.
Yes.
We see that. Right?
You see that all the time.
White House right now, maybe?
On both sides. But I always have said that I learned more from the losses than I have the wins at the end of the day. And I would argue in 2006, I was running the committee to elect a Republican Senate, and we lost the majority that year. And it was, had nothing to do with our candidates or campaigns. When you're polling on a state Senate race and they're saying, well, I want to send a message to the president, and you're like, this is the state Senate in Wisconsin. What message are you sending in this race to the president? He doesn't care. But it didn't matter. We got blown out of the water, and my quote in the AP article the next day was, it's a Republican bloodbath, and we all lost. But I came out of that understanding what it takes to survive a bad political environment. In 2008, I did the exact same job and oversaw a number of races where we were expected to lose anywhere from 2 to 3 races, and we didn't lose a single one. And it was because of what I learned out of all those losses in 2006 that completely changed my perspective on candidates and campaigns, and to this day still impacts me even in this election cycle.
Well, something you said just now struck me because you mentioned, maybe state voters in state races wanting to send a message to the president. What do you think about that now?
I don't see that. I mean, this was extraordinary in 2006. I have not seen anything like this, and I don't know if you saw this with 2010 or 2014, but like you would read the verbatims, and there's so much anger in 2006. They weren't happy with the direction of the country. They weren't happy with the war in Iraq. They weren't happy with just everything. They were just very unhappy, and it wasn't just Democrats. It was Republicans too, at the end of the day, who were not happy with the direction of the country. And so this is different because my view of it is people generally don't mind the direction of the country and the economy. They may not like the personality that occupies the White House. And I don't think you can compare this current election cycle to an 06 or something like that, because it's a different dynamic. It's more about the person and the personality, and less so about the policy and the direction of the country.
Looking ahead, or looking to now with the primaries that each of your parties are facing, I'm curious what similarities and differences you each see. Tonya, maybe for you more with other gubernatorial primaries, whether it was the recall or 2010, 2014 wasn't really a primary issue, but and Keith, for you, whether you're looking back, comparing the Senate race to any similarities in the 2010 gubernatorial primary that you worked on, or the 2012 race. Just what dynamics do you see at play? What lessons have both parties learned in each case? What's changed now?
Well, I'll say, living the 2012 U.S. Senate race with Tommy Thompson, I was not involved. I got involved post-primary. But, walking into that campaign after the primary, the realization of just what a toll that primary took, both financially and message-wise, was startling, to say the least. And my fear is our party's on the path to experiencing the exact same thing. And Tammy Baldwin is a very smart, tactical politician who I think is seeing a lot of similarities and probably preparing to exploit the same situation that we saw in 12.
Well, and I think you might assume that that because of the gubernatorial primary having as many candidates as it does, that is the fate, that is sort of the situation with sort of our party. And I would tell you it's the opposite. I think in what was the year when it was the Doyle-Barrett-Falk primary, that was a year where there was a lot of those problems that I think the Democratic Party had in sort of reunification after that primary. I don't see that now. I really see, for the most part, if we think is what's probably going to happen is probably going to happen. I don't think the sort of the reunification or the unification or the get up and go-edness and right away, I don't think we're seeing that. I think we're going to see our party come together very quickly and unite against beating Scott Walker. So
I don't necessarily disagree with that point, but none of the candidates in this race, I think, can hold a stick to Barrett, Kathleen Falk, and Doyle at the end of the day. They were proven politicians in many different respects compared to the current Dem primary. My opinion.
Although they're beating you in some of the polls I've seen.
Theoretically.
So.
I will always say this. Yes, the polls say that. But the problem is, it's the numbers behind the numbers that matter. Mm-hmm. And I can pick apart a Marist poll in no time flat, as well as the Emerson College poll. So the one that you have a harder time disputing, but not is always right, but I respect him, is Charles Franklin, the Marquette poll. You gotta be wary on both sides of national pollsters coming into the state that don't understand our state and what Tonya talks about in terms of what that turnout looks like and what that enthusiasm looks like for each party in the election cycle. And I think Charles has a better pulse of that and does a better job. I don't think he's perfect in any way, shape, or form, and I think both parties have had times where we've disputed with Charles about
when he doesn't not my fair, I don't like him.
When the numbers aren't my way, I don't like his polls, but when they're going my way, He's a great pollster.
That's right.
So.
That's right. The other thing, too, to keep in mind, and I think Keith certainly knows this, and I'm sure everybody in the room probably knows this, too, instinctively, but polls are just a read of a slice of time, right? So many things can happen between now and then, and dynamics can change, and just attitudes can change pretty quickly. I'll tell you again, using my most recent experience in the Clinton campaign, I mean, most polls showed that we were going to win, including our internal polls, right? But there was a medium degree of undecideds, and conventional wisdom will tell you that undecideds break a certain way, and we anticipated them to not necessarily break our way, right? We anticipated them to break the other way by about 2 to 1. They undecideds tend to vote to the non-incumbent, and we pretty sure that the voters viewed us as the incumbent. But what actually happened is 100%, literally, of the undecided voters in that last week, went over to the other side, and so polls can change really quickly, particularly with what we call late deciders. There are a lot of people, not like any of us in this room, like. I know none of you are probably undecided in any race that is even coming up, but there are a lot of people out there who are what we call late decided, and they're also low information voters. That doesn't mean that they're not smart, it just means that they don't have a lot of information until very late in the game. And so that's why I think a lot of times polls can be very misleading, and why what you said is the numbers behind the numbers really are the important parts of it, really digging into those polls and making sure that you're viewing or looking at the views of the important voters. They're all important, right? But I don't know. I'm going to get emails about that, I'm sure.
Every voter matters.
Every voter matters. But the numbers behind the numbers are really important, to your point.
Yeah. And I'll tell a story which is somewhat disparaging toward the pollster, our internal pollster on the Walker campaign. But ahead of the recall, this is the Friday before Election Day of the recall, we got our final poll back, our final poll track, and it showed us down 4 points on the ballot. And so me and our general consultant at the time were like, okay, let's get on the phone and just talk this through. And he's walking through the poll numbers, this and that, and this is going to be a photo finish. And he got done, and I said, I'll tell you what, whatever your numbers say, I feel complete opposite. We are going to win. We're going to win by a bigger margin, and my gut's telling me you are absolutely wrong. You are absolutely wrong. And he's like, nope, this is what the numbers say. I'm like, well, Election Day, we're going to find out who is right. I was right. And the one thing I want to say is I think the media gets obsessed, and the general public, and people that like to follow politics get obsessed with polling. And us that are in the campaign business, it's about gut. We trust our guts, and you'll see numbers, at the same time you'll sit there and go, no, I don't think that's right. I think you got that completely wrong. And I'm sure Tonya's had those moments too, where you just sit there and say, absolutely, you are 100% wrong, and I know it because my gut's telling you. So as much as numbers and polls will be out there and everyone will pontificate about the latest poll, and then what's even more fun is old political hacks, like if I ever retire and what I hope to become, who get paid to go do TV shows or whatever, start reading the polls and what they see publicly and tell you what you're doing wrong on your campaign. I hate those people. Just hate them. And they Monday morning quarterback all the way. And, but at the end of the day, it's us who are running campaigns that have been around the block, have seen a lot, and we're the ones that are counted on to keep a steady focus and not let those kind of stories, those numbers, these outside polls to distract from what's the plan, what's the strategy, what's the message.
And I'll ask this for each race. I want to hear first, which Democratic candidate do you each think gives Scott Walker the toughest challenge in November?
You want to go first?
No.
No? Okay, I'll go.
Nope.
Fine, I'll do it.
No. If you think I'm going to answer this question in this crowd of people, look at the bumper stickers out there. Are you kidding?
Well, I've never seen a candidate ever commission a poll to specifically rebut a political pundit, but I have seen it off our last panel. So we'll see what happens after this panel. So I would say I don't know that I can narrow it down to one candidate for the Dem field. And I think part of it is it's kind of first tier, second tier. I think the first tier is clearly Tony Evers. I think he's ultimately going to prevail. And I think it'll be a fact of the other candidates just not having enough time and enough resources to ultimately compete with Tony. And so I think him, Kelda Roys, and Malin Mitchell are probably the top three in terms of the first tier. You know, Matt Flynn's probably around there looking in, but I don't think ultimately he's going to be successful for a variety of reasons. If he did, I'd love it, but I don't think that's going to happen. So, and then everybody else. Out of that group, I think no matter what, there's attributes to each of those candidates that would make things difficult, but there are also things in terms of messaging and positions and policies that we want that opportunity to differentiate between Governor Walker and whoever that Dem opponent ends up being. So I'm not fearful of any of them in the first tier, and I'm not concerned about any of them, but there are going to be positive attributes, and they're going to run a competitive race. You know, ultimately, you know, one of the things we were talking about in terms of questions here is, you know, what is Wisconsin? It's an extraordinarily deep purple state, albeit with a very small ticket splitting population in terms of the voters, but it's still going to be competitive, and this is going to be competitive all the way to November, and ultimately we feel will prevail because we have a great record to run on, and we feel there's no issue where we don't have a list of accomplishments that we can go toe-to-toe with any opponent at the end of the day with.
Well, I would agree with you on one part of that, which is I think they all would, most, I'm not going to say all, most would definitely pose a big challenge to you and could have a path to ultimately be successful.
Okay, name names. I won't do it to you. No.
Well, there's no press in the room, right? I can just, yeah. No, in all honesty, though, I do believe that the first tier is very similar. I'll just say to the ones that you identified. I do think that any one of those candidates does have a clear path to being able to be the next governor of the state of Wisconsin. I think that this year is different. The environment is so different. I think the environment is on our side. You've got to figure out how to shake the Trump drag. I think you actually are pretty good at it, but I think that's going to still be a factor. Mm-hmm. I think there is a bit of Walker fatigue. He's actually been governor for quite a while now, and you know, being an entrenched incumbent,
he is on his fourth election, so.
Mm-hmm. But being an entrenched incumbent of any party probably really isn't probably what voters are really looking for right now. And then I disagree with you that you have sort of a better positioning on the issues. I think on, you know, healthcare, roads, and education, I just think that even though you have really good things to say about that, I'm not sure voters are in a position where they're going to buy it right now. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you're still my friend. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Keith, you did say you think Wisconsin is deep purple. Do you agree, Tonya? Do you both think that the state's still purple at the end of the day?
Well, why? Come on. If Obama and Trump both win this state,
sure.
It's gotta be.
But is it trending? I mean, is it becoming red, or is it still at the end? Is it still going to flip back?
I mean, if you're talking about presidential, in a lot of respects, I think we should sort of cross 2016 off the list of a factor, because there's just so many things that are not the same and probably will never be the same in that race, and you know, including, you know, again, I know I mentioned it before, but you know, there was almost, you know, certainly not the level of resources in 2012 spent on the presidential level as there were in the 16, yeah. In the Clinton campaign, and you know, so it's hard for me to look at that as like the well, that we went red then, so must be a trend. I don't buy that. I believe it's purple. I don't believe it's trending red. And I think now it's sort of trending more back again, more blue.
I will say Donald Trump will win this state if the Democratic Party nominates a East or West Coast liberal that treats Middle America as flyover country. That would be my prediction.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the part about treating people in Wisconsin as flyover country. I absolutely agree with that part. I'm not sure where they're from matters. Authenticity and all of the other things that we look for in candidates is really going to matter. I think energizing our base, I think we learned in 2016 that that's a key critical piece to all of our, that's not as much of a thing for you guys. For us, it's a key critical piece, and we do need a candidate that is really going to motivate our base, as well as not treat us like flyover country that like the previous one might have.
We'll flip to the Senate race now, and I'll ask the same question. Which Republican candidate will give Tammy Baldwin the biggest challenge? Now Keith doesn't want to answer it.
I think, I will go out on a limb. I think Buchmer's probably going to win. I think she's going to have some serious problems. I think if, however, Nicholson does win, I think he has problems as well. I think authenticity is a problem for him. I think even in his own party, people are trying to figure him out. Like, what? He was here and there, and I think people read into that. They're looking for authenticity. I don't think he has it. Leah Vukmir, on the other hand, I mean, if just take one look at that gun ad that she has with the gun on the table, and you just got to go, what? So I think she's probably going to win, but I think that either one of them will have a real hard time against Tammy.
Well, as I stated earlier, I think there's a challenge here of us repeating what happened in 2012. It's probably, I think, everyone in our party's number one concern is GOP nominee emerging bruised, battered, and broke. And so we're very concerned about that. I don't think Tonya's off. I think in terms of her analysis of the race currently, I think Leah Vukmir has clearly established some momentum here as we close in the final weeks. I think the challenge has always been on Kevin's side to clearly demonstrate he is the conservative he says he is, and I don't think he's crossed that threshold in the primary. Now there's still a couple of weeks left. He could reverse that trend line or accomplish that task at the end of the day between now and Election Day, but right now, I'd probably give. I'd say that Leah's probably going to win this primary, albeit probably very close at the end of the day. And I'm sure that's going to set the Nicholson campaign
You're going to get emails
so
tonight.
They may be already tweeting at me. I don't have a Twitter handle, so they can't tweet at me. But they may commission a poll to rebut what I just said, so don't be surprised by that.
We're good business for pollsters.
Pollster industry is going through the roof just because we say a few words on stage.
For those of you who missed the last time these two were together, the West Politics thing, our Democratic strategist here mentioned that Paul Soglin maybe didn't have a shot at winning, and there was a poll to rebut that.
A few days later. Along with some comments that weren't so nice about me.
So I don't necessarily buy into tying Trump to a lot of what's going on in state level races, and I don't like to ask a lot of Trump questions, but we have a Trump question here, and I also, as we've been talking, I think looking at the Senate race the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of Trump talk in terms of were either candidate with him from the beginning? Does it matter? Does it matter that they said bad things about him? Does it matter when they came on board? So I'm curious about that. Sort of what role does Trump play in the Senate primary, if any? And also probably more looking at the general in the governor's race. Does that play a role there?
Well, I'll tackle this first. Yeah. Well, let me start with, it's a problem in both parties in terms of this purity test that goes on sometimes with candidates. It's unfortunate because there's good candidates that deserve to win and could win in generals, but then lose in primaries because they don't meet some obscene purity test that just is impossible impossible to pass. But that being said, I don't think in this primary regarding the U.S. Senate that the ultimate loyalty to the president is going to be the final decision maker or decision point for primary voters. I don't believe it. I think what you see is a combination of Leah Vukmir being a state senator for a number of years, assemblywoman, a grassroots person for a number of years. So she's built up credibility within the party for supporting, our candidates, our party at the end of the day. And that's where the strength of her polling, I think, comes from. Versus Kevin, I think there's issues with respect to, his conversion to from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And I think that is probably more challenging at the end of the day. And both of them, let's just be honest about it. I mean, either one of them as the nominee is going to be supportive of the president's agenda at the end of the day. I mean, it doesn't matter which one comes out of the primary. That is what the Republican nominee is going to be at the end of the day. And so I really think loyalty to the president is kind of a moot issue specific to our U.S. Senate race. And I think it's a moot issue heading into the primary as well, or into the general, I'm sorry, for the U.S. Senate, because they're going to be accused of supporting the president's agenda no matter what. So you might as well just own it at that point. From, the general election in terms of the governor's race, I think there's opportunities, whether, it's Governor Walker or any governor across the state. I mean, each governor and each state has a different set of issues, and there are certain things that may impact other states positively and other states negatively. And I think it's always within a governor's right to be able to express that belief that maybe something the president is doing is adverse to their state. And the governor has, stated a number of times on certain aspects of the tariffs that have been implemented that are going to have adverse impacts on manufacturers in the state of Wisconsin. So everything in this election cycle is becoming a question of loyalty to the president, and everyone wants to play that up. But what I think most voters want to know is, if you're running for governor, and I'm just talking about governor, I'm not talking about U.S. Senate. If you're running for governor and you're standing up for your state and advocating for your state, that's what they care about most. And at the end of the day, I believe voters make a distinguishment between people that are running for office here in Wisconsin versus those running for office in D.C. or are already elected officials in D.C. And they have an extraordinarily negative view of those people in D.C., and they have a way better view of the people back here in Wisconsin that are advocating for this state.
I think, too, the one thing that might be in your favor as it relates to this Trump question is, I think Trump has so jumped the shark, that saying is, that,
yeah.
That it's easy for you to be like, that's not us, that's, and sort of take the good and brush away the side, or the bad. I think voters might still hold you accountable for some level of his shenanigans and his ineptness, I'll say it. But I do think that the more he does and the more outrageous he is, the easier it almost is for you to be able to step away. So, there's nothing we can do about that other than beat you in another way.
Yeah. Hey, he's a New Yorker, and he's got a New York style of communications and media relations, and that's something brand new to this country. So
we have a question from the audience that is asking why primary elections were moved to August, and I don't know, I'm sure you both can speak to that, but I would maybe expand on that and ask how the August timing changes or affects the way these things work.
Well, they used to be in September, and it was just so hard to get your shit together in that short period of time if you had a real primary. And honestly, August is actually pretty late in the scope of the country, or where they lie in other states. So I don't know. I think August is okay. I think May might actually even be better to do it because I think more people are, August in Wisconsin is pretty dang nice. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people, despite, our enthusiasm for the primary, a lot of people, it's just are not here or on vacation or otherwise occupied too. So why did we move it to August? I don't remember. You guys did that.
That was a military HAVA issue. So it was about making sure that you got enough, you got ballots out in time for militaries overseas to vote. Look, ultimately I can say this. No matter what, incumbents are going to love September, whether you're August, if you're a Republican or Democrat. If you're a challenger, you're going to love May. It's irrespective of party.
So we're coming down to our last few minutes of this, and I think I was going to ask you both who you think is going to come out, but I think you've both said you both agree probably Tony Evers and Leah Vukmir. Is that?
I didn't say that. I didn't say Tony Evers.
You did not say that. You're not going to say.
No, I'm not going to say because I think that there is, as Keith mentioned, I think there is a top tier. I think any one of them has a path to be able to do it. I do think that it will be. Tony is hard to catch right now. But I do think that depending on what happens, 2 weeks is a very short period of time, but it's also an eternity in politics. So I don't know.
Still possibly a toss-up.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We'll
You think?
I think Tony's going to win. Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is he's got an early lead. He's built it up. He's got statewide name recognition. He's run statewide, albeit in spring electorate. But there's a base of support out there, and you have relatively unknown opponents compared to him. And, I think the Marquette poll 2 times over has demonstrated every single one of those of his opponents were in single digits while he was going from 25 to 31, and you can dispute whether he had a big enough sample to get an accurate read, but you can't dispute the fact that it was a 20-point plus lead. So, and this is all a function of money in ads to get your name and your message out there, and I don't think any of the candidates outside of Tony had enough money and enough time to get their name out there.
Okay, to close this out, I'm going to let you each take some shots at each other and say some nice things about each other and for your own party.
Didn't we did a little bit. Do that?
Yeah. I want you each to just talk about the biggest challenges and opportunities for both parties, for your own and for the other, heading into August and then into November.
Well, I mean, our opportunities are probably easier to state because of what we've seen happening recently across the country and here in Wisconsin with the special elections. I mean, I think the environment is a lot better for us. I think that gives us a big opportunity. Money is always a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge for Democrats. We just don't have as much of it. We, this time, though, I would say have a bevy of really good candidates running in some of these legislative seats where we oftentimes have a hard time recruiting really good quality candidates for Senate and Assembly. No offense to anybody in the room, because good candidates win. But we oftentimes have a hard time convincing people to do this really tough thing, and that has actually changed for us in the last year. People are more willing now to step up in their community and be like, okay, I will do this. And I think that bears out in a much higher level and quality of candidates that we have seen in this last recruitment cycle. I'll just put it that way. Again, challenge is money. We never have as much money. I think the enthusiasm, though, is going to make up for a lot of that, and we've seen that in some of the recent special elections. So I'm really bullish about our chances. I think, the Senate, I'm bullish about our chances in the governor's race. I'm also with the state Senate. I think, they need two to flip, and they've got 5 targeted races, and they got some really good candidates in those races. I think, I don't think that Scott Walker this time is going to have big coattails, and I think we just have a very much more motivated electorate on our side. So,
well, I won't dispute that the wind is in our face as a party from the Republican perspective, and the wind is at the back from the Democratic perspective. And we've had this ebb and flow go back and forth between, 08 to 10 to 12 to 14 to 16. And what you see is, it kind of flows back and forth. And I think that's part of how our democracy is, constructed, is an opportunity every 2 years to kind of weigh in on how things are going and how they feel about the direction of the country, their state, et cetera. I think there's a lot of challenges for both parties. I mean, there is a higher level of scrutiny for both sides. There's bigger or tougher litmus tests for success to win your nomination at the end of the day. But, I mean, the system still works. I mean, we still, Barack Obama was president, Donald Trump's president, and in 4 years, there's going to be a referendum on Donald Trump's 4 years, and we're all going to find out what the American public thinks of his presidency at the end of the day. So we all have an opportunity to pass judgment with our vote at every level of government, and I think that's important. It keeps people honest to a degree.
Keeps us employed.
Keeps us employed. I wish it would switch to an every year model. That would be fantastic. Increase profits 200%. Anyone that isn't acknowledging a tough political environment is not being honest from the Republican side. And what I've told people is there's two fundamental pieces that help overcome that. Getting out into your district, shaking the voters' hands, and knocking on their doors, and raising money so you can communicate your message and your successes at the end of the day. I feel like we can hold the Senate and the Assembly if our candidates do that. I believe we can hold the governorship. I think we can potentially win the U.S. Senate. But it's all predicated on the ability of that candidate to connect with the voters and raise the money to get their message out. And if they can't do those two fundamental things, they're never going to win. And that doesn't matter if you're an assembly candidate, a state senate, governor, U.S. Senate. You'll lose if you can't do those two fundamental things at the end of the day. So.
And for us, it's also then really motivate our base voters too, that who don't always see themselves as voting in the off year elections or non-presidential year elections too. So, and I didn't mention the Assembly. I don't think when I was talking about opportunities, but they have a shot too. I mean, 15 seats is a lot, no doubt, but. In Virginia, we saw it happen, more than 15 seats. And Democrats right now are performing in Wisconsin since the 2016 election about 9.5 points above normal Democratic performance. And that would mean that puts just a whole heck of a lot more seats in play if that trend continues in the Assembly. So
I would point out that in the Virginia election, predominantly, I think all but one of those seats that was a pickup was all in the D.C. media market. So it was hyper-localized to a very specific group of people that were seeing what was going on in D.C.
Right, but they still flipped 17 seats.
Yeah,
that's
a
not,
lot.
That's no
There's
small
a lot,
thing,
but
so.
Yeah. Well, technically, it didn't flip.
Well, I flipped 17 seats, but you guys won with a coin toss. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
We held the majority,
with the
but
coin
we lost
toss,
17.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite things about doing these things is that we get people of differing perspectives in this room together, and we can have a civil conversation and maybe be friends at the end of the day. So I very much appreciate both of you being willing to do that and coming into this space, and friendlier territory for you.
I know, we got to give Keith a round of applause for actually like walking into the lion's den.
I was told there was beer here.
Yeah, I know. It'd be like next he's going to be like, okay, I came to your place. Now you have to come to rural Waukesha.
Yeah,
I'll be like, no! Country Inn and Suites, is that what it's called? Yeah,
yes. It's a fantastic place. The water slides are excellent.
We should take our kids.
Yeah,
there you go. We'll take our kids.
That would be a lot more fun, actually.
Right. Let's get a round of applause for both of these two. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you for listening to Cap Times Talks. We release new episodes every month or so, but in the meantime, be sure to check out our other podcasts like The Corner Table, a show about food and drink in Madison, or a brand new show that we're calling Mad Splainers, which breaks down the intricacies of local government. I host that one, along with Abby, who you just heard hosting this talk, and our Metro reporter, Lisa Speckard-Pask. Be sure to subscribe to Cap Times Talks on iTunes or anywhere else you find podcasts. And be sure to leave us a rating or a review. I'm Eric Lawrenson, and thanks again for listening.